My name is Frank Calloway. I'm 57 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my daughter-in-law stood up at my retirement dinner. The dinner my wife had spent 2 months planning, looked me dead in the face in front of every person I've ever worked with, and said, "You're not retiring, Frank. You're being put out to pasture. Everyone here knows it. The only person still pretending is you." Then she picked up her glass of wine, turned to my wife, and poured it down the front of the dress Linda had driven to 3 different stores to find. My son Derek sat 2 chairs away. He watched the Pinot Noir run down his mother's chest and soak into the tablecloth. And he did not move. He did not speak. He reached for a dinner roll. Before I tell you what happened after that, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It means more than you think. Now let me take you back to where this actually started. I spent 34 years as a fire captain with the city of Charlotte. Station 19. You don't last 34 years in a firehouse without learning one thing that applies to absolutely everything else in life. You don't panic when the room is on fire. You assess. You breathe. You act with the information you have, and you don't second-guess yourself once you're moving, because hesitation in a burning building gets people killed. I carried that into my marriage, into raising my kids, into every conversation that mattered. My wife Linda is 55. We met in the summer of 1993 at a neighborhood block party on Elm Ridge Drive. She was bartending the drink station, which was really just a folding table with a cooler and some plastic cups, and she handed me a Coke and said, "You look like you just came off a 24-hour shift." I'd been awake since the previous morning, and I was standing there in gym shorts and a faded department t-shirt, and she still gave me her number on a napkin. We've been married 30 years. She spent 22 of those years as a pediatric nurse at Mercy General, working the kind of shifts that meant she was either leaving the house when I was coming home, or coming home when I was leaving. We raised 2 kids in the gaps between sirens and vital signs. She retired last year. She's the kind of person who remembers every patient's name, who sends cards to families she treated a decade ago, who cries at the national anthem not because she's sentimental, but because she actually means it. She has never once, in 30 years, raised her voice at another human being in anger. Our son Derek is 31. Smart, good-looking, the kind of kid who could talk his way into any room and make you feel like he belonged there. He went into pharmaceutical sales right out of college and was pulling 6 figures by 27. I was proud of him for that. I told him so. What I didn't tell him, because I hadn't figured it out yet myself, was that somewhere between the corner office and the company car, Derek had started measuring people by what they could do for him. And when he brought home Vanessa, I should have seen it coming. Derek introduced Vanessa to us at a steakhouse downtown on a Friday evening in March, about 2 years before the retirement dinner. She was 29, tall, put together, the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately finds the most important person in it. She found me first, shook my hand, held it a second longer than necessary, looked me right in the eyes. "Captain Calloway, Derek talks about you constantly." She didn't say the same to Linda. When Linda went in for a hug, Vanessa took a half step back and offered her hand instead. A quick shake. 2 fingers, really. The way you'd greet someone interviewing for a position you've already filled. Linda didn't mention it in the car. She talked about how pretty Vanessa was, how confident she seemed, how nice the restaurant had been. She's generous that way. She builds the best version of people in her mind, and then works backward from there, and she'll keep doing it until the evidence makes it impossible. My sister Patty called the next morning. She'd met Vanessa briefly when Derek brought her by Patty's house that same week. "Frank, I need you to hear something and not brush it off. Go ahead." That woman cataloged Patty's house in the first 4 minutes. I watched her eyes. She checked the fixtures, the furniture, the art on the walls. She asked Derek what your pension looked like while they were standing in my kitchen, and she said it loud enough for me to hear. Maybe she's just practical. There's a difference between practical and taking inventory, Frank. You know that. I told Patty I appreciated her looking out. I told myself she was being overprotective the way she'd been since we were kids growing up on the same street. I filed it away. That was my first mistake. The next 18 months were slow erosion. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could point to and say, "There, that's the moment." It was 100 small adjustments, each one so minor that calling it out would have made me look paranoid. Vanessa stopped addressing Linda directly around month 4. Everything went through Derek. "Tell your mom we can't do Sunday. Let your parents know we have plans." Linda became a message to be relayed, rather than a person to be spoken to. When Linda would tell stories at dinner, the good ones, 22 years of kids and families in a pediatric ward, stories that could make a stranger tear up, Vanessa would pull out her phone. Not obviously, not rudely, just enough to signal that whatever Linda was saying wasn't worth her full attention. Linda started editing herself. I watched it happen in real time. She'd begin a story, glance at Vanessa, and trail off. Anyway, it's not that interesting. That sentence became a reflex. Anyway, it's not that interesting. My wife, who had held dying children in her arms and told their parents exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, had started believing her own stories weren't worth finishing. That's the thing I carry. Not what Vanessa did to me, what she did to Linda's voice. Around month 10, Derek called to tell us Vanessa's parents were hosting a barbecue for the 4th of July, and they wanted us there. The Prescotts lived in a gated community in South Charlotte, the kind of neighborhood where the HOA has an opinion about your mailbox. We showed up with a pie Linda had made from scratch. Blueberry, her grandmother's recipe, the one she only makes for occasions that matter. Vanessa's mother, Diane Prescott, met us at the door in white linen, gold earrings, a smile that cost more than our mortgage payment. "Oh, how sweet," she said, looking at the pie. "We actually have a caterer, but that's so thoughtful." She set it on a side table near the garage entrance. I found it there at the end of the night, untouched, still in its dish. During the barbecue, Vanessa's father, Gerald Prescott, real estate developer, golf handicap he mentioned 3 times, pulled me aside near the pool. "So Frank, fire department, huh? Derek says you're coming up on retirement." "That's right, 34 years. That's a hell of a run." He sipped his drink. "Pension must be, what, decent? For government work?" I looked at him. "It's enough, sure. I just mean Derek and Vanessa, they've got big plans. You know how it is. Young couple, ambitious. They'll need family support." He said it the way you'd pitch a timeshare. Friendly, forward, already assuming the answer. "They'll have our support," I said. "The kind that matters." He didn't ask what I meant by that. I don't think he was interested. When Derek and Vanessa got engaged, Linda organized a small celebration at our house. She cooked for 2 days, set the table with the china we'd gotten as a wedding gift 30 years ago. She put out photos of Derek growing up, from his first day of school to his college graduation. She was so happy. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching her arrange flowers, and I thought, she deserves this. She deserves to feel like she's part of this. Vanessa and Derek arrived 40 minutes late. No call, no text. When they walked in, Vanessa glanced at the table, at the photos, at the food Linda had spent 2 days preparing, and said, "Oh, this is cute. Very homey. The way you'd describe a bed and breakfast you'd never go back to." During dinner, Vanessa announced that the Prescotts would be handling all wedding planning. Mom and Dad have a planner, a venue coordinator, the whole team. It's easier if everything goes through one family. She looked at Linda and added, "But you're welcome to help with small things if you want. Like, I don't know, maybe the guest book?" The guest book. 30 years of marriage, 22 years of nursing. A woman who could plan a ward Christmas party for 200 people on a hospital budget, and she was being offered the guest book. Linda smiled and said, "I'd love to help however I can." I set my fork down. Under the table, I pressed my hand against my knee to keep it still. Later that night, after they'd left, I found Linda in the kitchen washing dishes by hand even though the dishwasher was empty. She does that when she needs to think with her hands. "She didn't try the cobbler," Linda said without turning around. I noticed. I made it because Derek mentioned once that Vanessa liked peaches. I walked up behind her and put my hands on her shoulders. She kept washing. "Am I being too sensitive, Frank?" "No. Maybe I'm just not what she expected. You're exactly what anyone should hope for." She didn't say anything else. I stood there with her until the dishes were done. And then we went to bed, and I stared at the ceiling for a long time. 5 months before my retirement dinner, the department's maintenance contractor backed out of a renovation project at Station 12. The chief needed someone who could coordinate the rebuild fast, someone with contacts in commercial construction. Derek had been trying to break into commercial project management, and he'd mentioned he wanted a reference from someone in city operations. He called me on a Tuesday night. "Dad, if you could put in a word with Chief Harding, it would mean a lot. Just an introduction. I'll handle the rest." I made the call. Harding owed me a favor from 2014, and I used it. Derek got the meeting. The meeting led to a contract, a small one, but his first in the commercial sector. 2 weeks later, Derek called again. Different voice. Dad, Vanessa found out you talked to Chief Harding. You asked me to. I know. She feels like you went over her head, like you're inserting yourself into our business decisions. I held the phone away from my ear for a second and looked at it, as if the phone itself might explain what I was hearing. Derek, you called me. You asked for the introduction. I know, Dad. I know. But can you just let us handle things from here? Vanessa feels like there's a pattern. A pattern. I'd made one phone call that he asked me to make, and it was a pattern. All right, I said. You handle it from here. I hung up and sat in my recliner. Linda was reading in the next room. She didn't ask. I didn't explain. My retirement was set for June 14th. 34 years, 3 commendations, 1 Departmental Medal of Valor, 11 men and women who'd served under me and were still in the department. Linda had been planning the dinner since February. She'd rented the back room at Moretti's, the Italian place on 5th, where the department had been celebrating retirement since before I joined. She'd contacted every station I'd ever worked at. She'd tracked down 3 guys I'd trained with in the academy in 1992, who'd moved to other states. She'd ordered a custom cake shaped like a fire helmet with 34 years. Captain Frank Calloway, written across the front. She did all of this while also making sure Derek and Vanessa had the best seats at the table, close to the front, close to the podium where Chief Harding would speak. She'd called Vanessa personally to ask if she had any dietary restrictions. Vanessa had responded with a text 3 days later, no gluten. The night of the dinner, 87 people filled that back room. Firefighters, paramedics, dispatchers, their spouses, my neighbors, friends going back decades. The department chaplain said a prayer. Harding gave a speech that made me look at my shoes because I wasn't going to cry in front of my crew, not after 34 years of training myself not to. Then they opened the floor for remarks. Linda was supposed to go last. She'd written something. I'd seen her working on it at the kitchen table for a week, crossing things out, rewriting, reading it out loud to herself when she thought I couldn't hear. She wanted it to be right. 3 people spoke. My old lieutenant, Eddie Vance, my academy buddy Phil Dawson, who'd flown in from Phoenix, and my neighbor of 20 years, Carl Whitfield, who told a story about the time I'd pulled his kid out of a backyard pool in 1998 that I'd honestly forgotten about. Then there was a pause. Linda gathered her notes. She started to stand. Vanessa stood first. She hadn't been asked. She hadn't been scheduled. She just stood, smoothed her dress, picked up her wine glass, and addressed the room like she'd been planning this. I just want to say a few words about my father-in-law. She smiled. Frank, I know tonight is supposed to be a celebration, and it is, but I think we should also be honest. The room shifted. I felt it. 87 people recalibrating. 34 years is a long time to do anything, and Frank, you've done it well. But let's be real, the fire department isn't what it used to be. Budgets are cut, stations are closing, and retirement packages aren't exactly what they were in the 90s. She paused for effect. You're not retiring because you want to. You're retiring because it's time. And there's no shame in that. She turned to face the room more fully. I see a lot of you here tonight, Frank's colleagues, his friends, and I think we should celebrate what this really is. Not a victory lap, a transition. From a man who was needed to a man who'll need to figure out what comes next. My chest went cold. So here's to Frank. Here's to figuring out what comes next. She raised her glass. A handful of people raised theirs out of reflex, the social autopilot that kicks in when someone makes a toast and you don't know what else to do. Most of the room sat still. Then she turned to Linda. She looked at her the way you look at something you've already decided to remove. And Linda. She picked up her glass of wine. This is for all those months of planning a party that could have been an email. And she tipped her glass forward, slowly, deliberately, and poured red wine down the front of Linda's dress. The pale blue dress, the one she'd driven to 3 stores to find, the one she'd tried on at home twice and asked me, "Is this too much? I don't want to overdo it." The wine ran down the fabric in a dark line. Linda didn't move. She sat there with her hands in her lap, and her notes for her speech, sitting on the table beside her plate, and she looked at the stain spreading across her chest, like she was watching something she'd built collapse in real time. The room went dead silent. 87 people holding their breath. Derek was 2 chairs away. He had a dinner roll in his hand. He set it down on his plate slowly. He looked at his mother. He looked at Vanessa. He looked at his plate. He picked the roll back up. He said nothing. I stood, not fast, not dramatic. I stood the way I've stood 1,000 times at a scene, when the chaos is happening and the only useful thing is to be steady. I took the cloth napkin from my place setting, walked around to Linda's chair, and pressed it gently against the stain on her dress, not to clean it. You can't clean red wine out of pale blue fabric with a napkin. I did it because my wife had just been humiliated in front of every person who mattered to us, and she deserved to be taken care of before she was taken anywhere. She looked up at me. Her eyes were full, but she wasn't crying. She was holding it. I set the napkin down. I helped her to her feet. I straightened the small pin she wore on her collar, the silver one shaped like a caduceus that the pediatric ward had given her when she retired. Then I buttoned my jacket, took her hand, and turned toward the room. I didn't look at Vanessa. I didn't look at Derek. I looked at the people in that room, the men and women I'd served with, bled with, trusted with my life, and I let them see exactly what had just happened without any words from me to shape their interpretation. Near the back, Eddie Vance caught my eye. He gave me a single nod, the kind that means everything and says nothing. "We're going to head out," I said to the room. "Thank you all for being here tonight. It's meant more than you know." I walked my wife out of that restaurant, with her hand in mine, and her dress stained, and her speech undelivered, past 87 people who would carry what they saw for the rest of their lives. Outside, the June air was warm, and the parking lot smelled like the jasmine Linda had planted at our house 3 years ago, and I held her against me and let her shake. Patty found us by the car 5 minutes later. She didn't say a word. She just stood there in her heels on the asphalt and put her arm around Linda. Linda was the first to speak. "Why didn't he?" She stopped. Started again. "Derek, he was right there." Nobody answered. There wasn't an answer that would have helped. I opened the passenger door. "Let's go home." In the car, Patty sat in the back. The ride was 15 minutes and none of us turned on the radio. Halfway home, Linda reached over and put her hand on mine on the steering wheel. "I don't want to lose him, Frank." "I know. Promise me." I kept my eyes on the road. "We're not going to lose Derek, but we're going to have to figure out what we're willing to accept. And I'll tell you right now, Linda, not this." She nodded once and turned to watch the streetlights pass. At home, after Patty left and Linda went to bed, I sat in my recliner in the dark. My phone was in my hand. I opened the text chain with my old friend Ray Holbrook. Ray and I went back 30 years. We'd worked our first structure fire together in 1992, both of us green and terrified, and pretending we weren't. He'd gone into commercial real estate after leaving the department in 2005, and he'd built something significant. His development firm was the largest in the Charlotte metro area. For the last year, his company had been leading the Whitfield Commons project, a mixed-use development, 180,000 square feet, the biggest commercial build the city had greenlit in a decade. 6 weeks ago, Derek had submitted a proposal to manage the interior coordination for Whitfield Commons. He'd called me, excited. His biggest pitch. He didn't know Ray was on the selection committee. He'd never asked how I knew Ray. He'd never been curious enough to ask. I typed a message. "Ray, if I call you tomorrow, pick up." His response came in under a minute. "Always, brother." Derek called at 11:40 that night. I took it in the bathroom with the door closed. "Dad," the careful, rehearsed voice. "We should talk about tonight." "I'm listening." Vanessa had too much to drink. She didn't mean it the way it came across. She's going to apologize to Mom tomorrow. I let the silence do its work. "Dad, she wants to make it right." "Derek, your wife stood up in front of 87 people and humiliated your mother on the night she'd spent 4 months planning. She poured wine on her dress. She called my retirement a put out to pasture, and you sat there and ate a dinner roll." The pause was long enough that I could hear him breathing. "I know," he said finally. "Before we talk about Vanessa's intentions or her blood alcohol level, I need you to sit with what you did tonight, what you chose not to do. Call me when you're ready to talk about that." I hung up and sat on the edge of the bathtub in the dark. Sunday morning, Derek called at 7:45, then 8:30, then 9:15. I let them all go to voicemail. Linda's phone rang at 10. She looked at the screen. "Vanessa." She looked at me. "Your call," I said. She set the phone face down on the table and wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. At noon, a text from Derek. "Dad, Vanessa is sorry. She wants to talk, please." I typed back, "When you're ready to talk about what happened, not to manage Vanessa's apology tour, call me." 4 hours of silence. Monday morning, I called Ray. "I saw it," he said. "You were there?" Eddie Vance called me. He described it, and then 3 other people described it separately within an hour. "Frank, the whole department is talking about it." I told Ray about the Whitfield Commons proposal, about Derek being on the short list, I told him the same thing I'd have told any man I trusted with my life. I'm not asking you to hurt him. I'm not asking you to blackball him. I'm asking you to stop doing what I've been doing for 31 years. Stop cushioning the fall. Let whatever happens happen on its own. Ray was quiet for a moment. You know what that means for the committee review. I know what it means. They're going to ask me about him, about his character, his network, his family. Tell them the truth, whatever that is for you. All right, Frank. Another pause. Are you okay? I'm figuring out what okay looks like from here. Monday afternoon, they showed up unannounced. I heard the car from the kitchen. Linda went still at the counter. I dried my hands. Vanessa was dressed like she was going to a board meeting. White blouse, pressed slacks, hair pulled back. She'd prepared for this. We sat in the living room. I didn't offer coffee. Mr. and Mrs. Calloway, I owe you an apology for my behavior Saturday evening. She folded her hands. I'm sorry if what I said was hurtful. Sorry. If, Vanessa, I said. A conditional apology isn't an apology. Sorry if it hurt is not the same as I was wrong. She held my gaze. I'm not sure what more you're expecting. I'll be specific. You stood up at a dinner my wife spent 4 months planning and belittled 34 years of my career in front of every person I've served with. Then you poured wine on my wife. And my son, your husband, sat there and reached for bread. What I need is not an apology. What I need is for you to understand what those things were. Derek started to speak. Dad, this isn't your turn yet, Derek. Vanessa's composure cracked at the edges. A muscle in her jaw tightened. So what happens now? What are you going to do? Nothing dramatic, I said. What it means is that Linda and I have changed what we're available for. You'll see what that looks like over time. They left 20 minutes later. At the door, Vanessa looked back at me. She was trying to read me, looking for the anger, the weakness, the leverage point. She didn't find it. She wasn't sure anymore, and she knew I knew it. Tuesday at 3 p.m., Ray called. The committee met this morning. Derek's technical submission was solid. Good instincts, professional presentation, and they asked me about him. Character references, professional network, family background. Standard for a project this size? What did you say? I told them I've known Frank Calloway for 33 years, and he's one of the most principled men I've ever worked beside. Then they asked if I had the same confidence in his son. Ray paused. I told them I hadn't worked with Derek directly, that I didn't have enough first-hand experience to vouch for him personally. I understood. In commercial development, that answer has a specific weight, not a condemnation, not a lie. The absence of an endorsement from someone positioned to give one. Everyone in that room understood exactly what that silence meant. They moved him off the short list, Ray said. I want you to know I didn't say a single negative word about him. I know. And I want you to know I'd have made that call for him 2 weeks ago if you'd asked. I didn't ask. No, Ray said. You didn't. We stayed on the line for a moment. Are you all right, Frank? I'm not sorry. That's new for me. After we hung up, I sat with it. The weight of what I hadn't done. I hadn't engineered anything. Hadn't schemed or plotted. I'd simply stopped being the net that caught my son before he hit the ground. He'd spent 31 years knowing I was there. He'd built his confidence on that knowledge, and Vanessa had built her contempt on it. Now both of them were going to find out what the world looked like without it. That wasn't revenge. That was the most honest thing I'd ever done for my son. Derek called Wednesday evening. The rehearsed voice was gone. What was left sounded younger, scared. Dad, we got the letter from Whitfield Commons, I heard. A long silence. Were you involved? I gave him the truth, all of it. I didn't make a single call against you. Didn't say a word to hurt your chances. What I did was stop stepping in the way I always have. That's not the same thing as sabotage, Derek, but I understand if it feels that way. You always stepped in. My whole life. I know. So why now? I looked at the family photos on the hallway wall. Derek at 6, missing 2 front teeth, holding a fire helmet that was bigger than his head. Because your wife humiliated your mother in front of 87 people, and you sat there. And I had to ask myself what it meant that I was still going to show up and smooth it over. What that was teaching you. I paused. What it was teaching me. He didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was lower. What do I do now? That's the first honest question you've asked me in 2 years. I meant it gently, and I think he heard it. Figure out what kind of man you want to be. Not for me, not for Vanessa. For yourself. What you'll stand for and what you won't stand for. That answer has to come from you. And if I figure it out, are we okay? We will always love you. That doesn't change. But okay is something you build. It's not a switch you flip. All right, he said. It wasn't enough, but it was the first honest brick. Vanessa came alone on Thursday. No warning. I opened the door, and she was standing there in jeans and sneakers. None of the Monday morning performance. You killed a major contract for my husband, she said. No preamble. Because of what happened at the dinner. That's retaliation. Come inside if you want to talk. I'll say it here. All right. You used your connections to punish Derek because of me. Vanessa, I didn't make a single call against your husband. I didn't contact anyone to work against him. What I stopped doing was advocating for him the way I always have. There's a difference, and if you think about it honestly, you'll see it. You let him fail. I let him stand on his own. That's what parents eventually have to do. You're punishing him for what I did. I'm done shielding him from consequences he's earned by the choices he's made, including the choice to sit at a table and eat bread while his wife poured wine on his mother. She stared at me, looking for the crack, the guilt, the fear of losing Derek that she could press on. If you don't support us, she said, you'll lose him. I looked at her for a long time. I lost something I thought I had when I watched my son make his choice that Saturday night. Whatever comes next gets built from here. That's up to Derek, not me, and not you. I took a step back. You don't get to tell me what my relationship with my son costs. That's not your currency to spend. I closed the door. Quiet, no slam, just a latch clicking into place. The weeks that followed were ordinary in the way things are ordinary after something breaks. The coffee still brews, the lawn still needs mowing, the mail still comes, but ordinary with new edges. Diane Prescott called on Wednesday. Linda took it. Diane's message, delivered in the smooth vocabulary of a woman who has mediated homeowner disputes, was that enough time had passed, feelings had been expressed, and wouldn't it be better if the adults could find a way forward for everyone's sake? Linda listened. Then she said something I didn't expect. Diane, I appreciate the call, but I don't need Frank to forgive anyone right now. What I need is for my daughter-in-law to actually understand what she did. Not perform understanding, actually understand. And I need my son to become the man I raised him to be. Neither of those things happened because we agree to be polite. There was a long pause on the line. Well, Diane said, I suppose we'll see. Linda hung up and stood at the kitchen counter for a moment. Then she turned around, and for the first time in 2 years, she looked like the woman I married. Not braced, not editing herself, not wondering if she was too much or not enough. Just there. 3 days later, an email from Derek. Subject line, can we meet? Just us. We met at the park on Riverside Drive, the one with the walking trail along the creek where I used to take him fishing when he was small enough to ride on my shoulders. He was already there, sitting on a bench, watching the water. I sat beside him. We didn't speak for a while. I knew, he said. Before the dinner, I knew Vanessa had a problem with Mom. I saw how she treated her. I kept telling myself it would level off. He looked at his hands. I wanted it to level off, so I let myself believe it would. That's not the same as not knowing. No, it's not. I should have stood up that night, Dad. At the dinner. When she did what she did, I should have gotten up and walked over to Mom and told Vanessa to leave. Yes. Why didn't I? That's a question for you, not for me. He sat with it. Can you forgive me? I thought about it. Actually thought about it. The way you think about something when the easy answer isn't enough. I love you, that's permanent. But forgiveness is something you earn through what you do from here. Not through asking. He nodded slowly. Vanessa and I are starting therapy, he said. I don't know where it goes, but I know I can't keep being who I've been. Good. I stood up. He stood with me. We didn't hug. Neither of us was there yet, but something passed between us that was more honest than anything we'd shared in 2 years. I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. 2 weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived for Linda. Vanessa's handwriting. Linda opened it at the kitchen table while I sat with my coffee. She read it twice, then she handed it to me. It was 1 page. This time, Vanessa used the word wrong. Not sorry if. Not I regret that you felt. She said she had been wrong. She said what she did was harmful. She took responsibility. She didn't claim to fully understand why she'd done it, which was honest, because understanding takes longer than writing a letter. Linda sat with it for a while. Then she went to the small desk in the living room, where she keeps her stationery, the cream-colored kind with her initials embossed at the top, and she wrote back. She brought it to me before sealing it. Vanessa, I received your letter. I'm glad you wrote it. I won't pretend the right words come easy, so I'll just say this. I hold no hatred toward you, but I can't pretend nothing happened. When you're ready to have an honest conversation, not to be forgiven, but to actually understand, I'll be here. Take your time, Linda. I handed it back. It's perfect. She sealed it herself, walked to the mailbox, and dropped it in. When she came back inside, she washed her hands, and started making lunch like it was any other Thursday. But she stood differently, straighter. The woman who'd spent 2 years saying, "Anyway, it's not that interesting," had stopped apologizing for taking up space. I didn't say a word to anyone. I want to be clear about that. I didn't make calls, didn't post anything, didn't send pointed emails. I went back to my life, fishing on Saturday mornings, working part-time as a safety consultant, helping Linda with the garden she'd started in the backyard, the one with the tomatoes and the marigolds and the basil she grows in terracotta pots by the patio. But 87 people carry 87 memories, and Charlotte is smaller than it looks. Within a month, I heard through Eddie Vance that Vanessa's event planning side business, mostly corporate functions and private parties, had gone quiet. Nobody was refusing her. The phone just wasn't ringing the way it used to. Referrals run on trust, and trust lives in the same community where 87 people watched a woman pour wine on a retired nurse's dress. Diane Prescott attended a charity luncheon where someone asked her directly whether the stories circulating about the retirement dinner were true. Diane said, "There was a misunderstanding." The table went quiet in exactly the way tables go quiet when no one believes the answer, but everyone is too polite to press. That's the sound of a reputation correcting itself, not through vengeance, through gravity. People ask me sometimes if I feel like I got justice. I tell them I'm not in the justice business, I'm in the integrity business. Those are different things. I want to pause here because I know what some of you are thinking. Did I feel guilty? Did I wonder if I should have handled it differently? Yes, every day. You don't watch your kid struggle, even when the struggle is of his own making, without carrying that weight. But I've learned something at 57 that I wish I'd understood at 30. Guilt and responsibility are not the same thing, and choosing not to intervene is not the same as causing harm. Let me ask you something before I finish. Have you ever been in a position where keeping the peace and keeping your dignity were two different choices? Where you had to pick one? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear it, because I think more of us have been at that table, in that room, holding that napkin, than we ever talk about. Alright, let me tell you where things stand now. 5 months later, Derek and I have breakfast every other Sunday. We go to a place called Millwood Diner on Route 16. The kind of spot with vinyl booths and coffee that comes in those thick, white mugs that never seem to cool down. We don't have an agenda. We talk about work, about the Panthers season, about whatever he's been thinking through. Sometimes we sit in quiet for 10 minutes and watch the traffic through the window, and that's enough. Vanessa hasn't been to our house. That's the current boundary, and nobody has said it out loud, but everybody understands it. They're still in therapy. Derek mentions it without detail, and I don't pry. His firm landed a mid-sized commercial project 2 months ago, a restaurant renovation on Trade Street. He got it on his own, through his own network. No calls from me, no favors pulled. When he told me, he sounded different, not just happy. Last Sunday at the diner, he was quieter than usual, working something out at his own pace. He set down his fork after a while. "Dad, that night at the dinner, when you stood up and put the napkin against Mom's dress and just walked out without saying anything, I waited. I've replayed it maybe 300 times. I had this whole idea of who I was, this picture of myself as a man who had it together. And then I watched you walk out of that room with Mom on your arm, not yelling, not threatening, just walking. And I realized I had no idea what strength actually looked like." He looked at the table. "I thought being strong meant never backing down. Turns out it means knowing when walking out is the harder thing to do." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Vanessa and I are still working through it," he said. "I don't know what the future looks like. But I know I'm not going to be the man who reaches for a dinner roll anymore." "I know," I said. He looked up. "You know? I can see it. These mornings I can see you working at it." He nodded. We paid the check and walked out into the late fall morning, two men with a long way still to go and enough honesty between them now to make the walk. If you've been listening to all of this, there's something I want to say before you go. If you recognized yourself somewhere in this story, maybe as someone who's been absorbing too much for too long, someone who's been at the table near the kitchen, someone whose child looked away at exactly the wrong moment, I need you to hear this. You are not required to make yourself smaller to keep someone else comfortable. Not even if that someone is your own child. Not even if there are 87 people watching to see what you'll do. Walking out is not giving up. Setting a boundary is not withdrawing love. And your stories are interesting. Don't let anyone train you to stop telling them. My name is Frank Calloway. I am still Derek's father. We have breakfast on Sunday mornings. We are building something that had to break before it could be built right. Linda's garden is full of tomatoes and marigolds. Ray and I have coffee twice a month. The Whitfield Commons project broke ground last week. I drove by the site and thought about foundations, the way I always do. And somewhere out there, my son is doing the hard, daily work of becoming the man he should have been all along. Some things you rebuild. Some things you just make sure you don't burn what's still standing. If this story stayed with you, if it gave you permission to draw a line you've been afraid to draw, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done? There are more stories like this one in the description. I'll see you in the next one.